The moment my own son pointed his finger at MY chair and told me to move, I knew this Thanksgiving dinner was about to become one for the history books.
Y'all, I'm Dorothy. I'm 72 years old, and I've been sitting at the head of this dining room table for 47 years, ever since my dear Harold brought me home as his bride to this little house in Nashville, Tennessee. But honey, what happened next was going to teach my family a lesson they'd never forget. You see, sweetie, I raised 3 children in this house, and my oldest boy, Michael, well, he's always been the one who thought he could walk all over mama. Standing there in his expensive suit with that smug look on his face, telling me I needed to give up my seat so his new girlfriend could sit at the head of the table? Can you imagine? After everything I've done for this family, after all the years I cooked their favorite meals and cleaned their messes, my own flesh and blood was treating me like some stranger who didn't belong. Let me tell you something about family dynamics, honey. When you've been the matriarch of a family for as long as I have, you learn to read people like an open book. And what I was reading in that dining room was about to make my blood pressure shoot through the roof. My daughter-in-law, Sarah, was standing behind Michael with this nervous look in her eyes, like she knew exactly what kind of man she'd married. My youngest daughter, Lisa, was staring at her phone, pretending she couldn't see what was happening right in front of her face. And my middle son, David, well, he was just standing there with his mouth hanging open like he'd never seen his brother act like a fool before. But y'all, before I tell you exactly how I handled this situation, and honey, this part is going to absolutely shock you. If you're loving this story, smash that subscribe button and hit the bell. You know I get so excited when I see y'all in the comments. Speaking of which, what state are you calling home right now? Drop it down below. And sweetie, tell me, have you ever had family treat you like you didn't matter? Because your stories help me know I'm not alone in this crazy world. Now, let me tell you what I discovered next, because what they did was about to backfire in the most beautiful way. See, what Michael didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I'd been planning something special for this Thanksgiving. Something that was going to show them exactly what happens when you take mama for granted. I'd been working with my lawyer for months, and honey, the papers sitting in my purse were about to change everything. But first, I had to let my son dig his own grave a little deeper. Michael, I said, my voice as steady as Sunday morning, are you absolutely certain you want me to move from this chair? The way I said it, you could hear 47 years of authority ringing in every word. This wasn't just any chair, sweetie. This was the chair where I helped 3 children with their homework every single night. This was where I balanced the family budget when Harold was working double shifts at the auto plant. This was where I sat and cried when the doctor told us Harold's heart was giving out, and where I made the hardest decisions a woman ever has to make. My son, bless his heart, just doubled down on his foolishness. Mom, you're being dramatic. It's just a chair. Jessica here is our guest, and guests get the best seat. Jessica, that's his new girlfriend, honey. Barely 30 years old with fake blonde hair and fake nails, and a fake smile that didn't reach her eyes. She'd been dating my son for all of 6 months, and she was already trying to run my house like she owned it. You know what? I let out the longest breath you ever heard and stood up from that chair. My shoulders felt like they were carrying the weight of the world. But I smiled the sweetest smile you ever did see. Of course, sweetheart, I said, stepping aside. By all means, Jessica, you take my seat. The silence that followed, honey, you could have cut it with a butter knife. Lisa finally looked up from her phone with this shocked expression, like she couldn't believe Mama had actually backed down. Sarah was wringing her hands like she wanted to disappear into the wallpaper. And David, well, he was just standing there with his mouth hanging open like he'd never seen his brother act like a fool before. But sweetie, They had absolutely no idea what Mama was about to do next. You could hear the mischief just dancing in my voice when I said, "Michael, honey, since Jessica's sitting in my seat, why don't you tell everyone about that conversation we had last month? You know, the one about the house?" I watched my son's face go 3 shades paler, and I knew I had him exactly where I wanted him. See, Michael had been pressuring me for months to sell the house and move into some retirement community. He kept saying things like, "Mom, you don't need all this space, and think of how much money you can make." But what he was really thinking, bless his heart, was how much money he could make when I was gone. "I don't know what you're talking about, Mom." But his voice had that shaky quality that told me he knew exactly what I was talking about. "Oh, honey, you know exactly what I'm talking about. The conversation where you told me this house was too much for an old woman like me. The conversation where you said I should sell it and split the money between you children now instead of waiting for me to die." The room went so quiet you could hear a pin drop in the next county. Jessica was sitting in my chair looking uncomfortable as a cat in the doghouse, probably wondering what kind of family she'd gotten herself mixed up with. But I wasn't done yet, not by a long shot. "You see, children," I continued, pulling a manila envelope from my purse, "your mama might be 72 years old, but she's not stupid. I've been watching how y'all treat me lately. I've been listening to the things you say when you think I can't hear. And I've been making some decisions about my future that might surprise you." I could see Michael's Adam's apple bobbing up and down like a fishing cork. He knew something was coming, but he had no idea how big it was going to be. Lisa had put her phone down completely now, and even Sarah was leaning forward to hear what I had to say. "Michael, sweetie, remember 2 months ago when you suggested I hire a cleaning lady because the house was too much for me to handle? And then last month when you said I shouldn't be driving at night anymore? And just last week when you told Jessica here that you were worried about my mental state?" Jessica's face turned red as a tomato, and she started to squirm in my chair like she was sitting on fire ants. Michael opened his mouth to say something, but I held my hand up again. "Oh, don't worry, honey. Jessica told me all about that conversation, didn't she, sweetheart?" I looked directly at Jessica, and she nodded like a bobblehead doll. "She told me how you said you were concerned about me living alone and how you thought it might be time for me to, what was the phrase? Oh, yes, face reality about my limitations." The silence stretched between us like a canyon, and I could feel the power shifting in that room like tectonic plates moving under the earth. This was the moment I'd been building toward, and honey, it felt better than Christmas morning.
"Well, Michael, I want to thank you for your concern because it got me thinking about my future, and I decided to make some changes." I opened that manila envelope and pulled out the papers inside. "These are the papers transferring ownership of this house to someone who actually appreciates it. Someone who's never made me feel like a burden or suggested I don't belong in my own home." Michael's face went from pale to green faster than grass growing in spring rain. "Mom, what are you saying?" "I'm saying, honey, that this house now belongs to your sister, Lisa. I held up the deed with Lisa's name on it, and you should have seen the look on everyone's faces. Lisa's mouth fell open so wide you could have caught flies. David looked like someone had knocked the wind out of him. Sarah actually gasped out loud, and Michael looked like he was about to have a heart attack right there in my dining room. "You can't be serious," Michael stammered. "Mom, this is insane. You can't just give away the house without discussing it with all of us." "Actually, sweetie, I can. It's called being of sound mind and body, which I most certainly am. And I discussed it plenty with the person who mattered, my lawyer, who happens to be David's wife's brother, by the way. He was very thorough about making sure everything was legal and binding." The words came out between little sobs when Lisa finally found her voice. "Mom, I can't accept this. The house should go to all of us, or... Honey, let me stop you right there, I said, walking over to put my hand on Lisa's shoulder. This house is going to you because you're the only one who still treats me like your mama instead of like some old lady who's in the way. You're the only one who calls me every week just to check on me, not because you need something. You're the only one who remembers that I might want to stay in my own home instead of being shipped off to some facility. I turned back to Michael, who was still standing there like a statue. And you, my dear boy, are going to learn what it feels like when someone decides you don't deserve respect. But y'all, I wasn't done yet. Not even close. See, there was more in that envelope, and what came next was going to shock them even more than the house deed. There's something else, children. Something I've been keeping from you for months now. I pulled out another set of papers, and my voice took on this knowing, satisfied quality. These are the papers from Grandma Ruth's estate, your daddy's mama, God rest her soul. Michael's girlfriend Jessica was looking around the table like she wanted to crawl under it and disappear. She was probably realizing that this family dinner was turning into something way more complicated than she'd signed up for. See, when Grandma Ruth passed last year, she left some things to me that I never told you all about. Harold always said his mama was a secretive woman, and honey, he was right. She had some investments that none of us knew about. Some stocks and bonds that had been sitting in a trust fund, just growing and growing for the past 20 years. David finally found his voice. Mom, how much money are we talking about? Well, darling, let's just say it's enough that I could have bought each of you a brand new house if I'd wanted to. But instead, I've been watching how y'all treat your old mama, and I've been making some decisions about who deserves what. The room was so quiet, you could hear everyone's heartbeat. Michael was gripping the back of a chair so hard his knuckles were white. Sarah looked like she was about to pass out. And Lisa? Well, Lisa looked like she was about to have a heart attack right there in my dining room. Michael, honey, I want you to understand something. This isn't about money, and it's not about the house. This is about the fact that you looked your mother in the eye and decided she wasn't worth common courtesy. You brought a stranger into my home and tried to make me feel like I didn't belong here. You treated me like some old woman taking up space instead of the woman who gave birth to you and raised you and loved you every day of your life. Michael's voice broke right in half when he finally spoke. Mom, I'm sorry. I really am. I never meant to. I know you're sorry now, sweetie, but you weren't sorry when you were telling Jessica how difficult I'd become. You weren't sorry when you suggested I shouldn't be trusted to make my own decisions anymore. You were only sorry when you realized there were consequences. I walked over to the window that looked out over the backyard where Harold and I had planted our first garden together, where we'd watched our children play on the swing set he built with his own 2 hands, where we'd sat on the porch swing every evening for 30 years, talking about our dreams and our fears and our hopes for the future.
You know what the sad part is, Michael? I would have given you anything. If you just treated me with kindness and respect, if you just remembered that I'm your mama and not your burden, I would have shared everything with you. But instead, you decided to try to push me out of my own life. When I turned back around, I could see that everyone was crying now. Even Jessica had tears running down her cheeks, though I suspected hers were more about realizing what kind of man she was dating than about feeling sorry for me. So here's what's going to happen from now on, I said, my voice taking on that matter-of-fact tone I'd used when they were children and needed to understand the rules. This house belongs to Lisa now.
but I'm going to keep living here as long as I'm able. Lisa and I have already discussed it, and she's happy to have me stay." Lisa nodded enthusiastically, wiping her eyes with her napkin. "Mom, I would never ask you to leave. This is your home." "Thank you, sweetheart. And Michael, you're welcome to visit anytime you like, as long as you remember whose house you're in and treat everyone here with respect. That includes me, that includes your sister, and that includes any guests we might have." I looked directly at Jessica when I said that last part, and she had the grace to look ashamed. "But if you ever, and I mean ever, try to tell me where I can sit in my own home again, or suggest that I'm too old or too confused to make my own decisions, or treat me like I'm invisible, then you won't be welcome here anymore. Are we clear?" Michael nodded like a little boy who'd been caught stealing cookies from the jar. "Yes, ma'am. We're clear." "Good. Now, Jessica, honey, why don't you move to one of the regular chairs so we can all sit down and have our Thanksgiving dinner like a civilized family?" Jessica practically jumped out of my chair like it was on fire, mumbling apologies and looking like she wanted to disappear. I settled back into my rightful place at the head of the table, and honey, it felt like coming home. But the evening wasn't over yet. Oh no, sweetie, there was still more drama coming, because that's just how family dinners go sometimes. About halfway through the meal, when everyone was starting to relax a little bit and the conversation was turning to safer topics like the weather and work, Michael decided to try one more time to assert himself. "Mom," he said, cutting into his turkey with more force than necessary, "I still think we need to talk about your future. Living alone in this big house, managing your finances, making important decisions, it's a lot for someone your age." The silence that fell over that table was thicker than morning fog on the Cumberland River. Lisa stopped chewing and looked at her brother like he lost his mind. David actually put down his fork and shook his head. And me? Well, honey, I just smiled. "Michael, darling, are you having some kind of hearing problem? Because I thought we just finished discussing this very topic about an hour ago." He started, "I just think," but I held up my hand. "No, sweetie, you don't think. That's been your problem all along. You don't think about how your words affect other people. You don't think about what it feels like to have your own child question your competence. You don't think about the fact that I managed this household and this family just fine for 50 years before you decided I needed your help." I could feel those tears starting to sting behind my eyes, but I wasn't about to let them fall. Not now. Not when I was finally standing up for myself after months of letting my son make me feel small. Let me tell you something about managing my finances, honey. I balanced this family's budget through 3 recessions, 2 job losses, and your daddy's medical bills. I managed to save enough money to send all 3 of you to college without taking out a single loan. I paid off this house 10 years early by working 2 jobs and clipping coupons and making sacrifices you'll never understand. My voice was getting stronger with every word, and I could see Michael shrinking back in his chair. And let me tell you about making important decisions. I decided to marry your daddy when everyone said he was too young and too poor. I decided to keep you when the doctor said there might be complications. I decided to stay in Nashville when your daddy got that job offer in Detroit because I knew this is where our family belonged. I took a sip of my sweet tea and let those words sink in before I continued. Every important decision in this family has been made by me or with me for the past 47 years, every single one. And now you want to suggest that I'm suddenly not capable of deciding where to live or how to spend my own money? Michael was staring down at his plate like it wished it would swallow him whole. Jessica was fidgeting with her napkin and looking everywhere except at me. The only sounds in the room were the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway and the distant sound of neighbors laughing at their own family gathering next door. I want you to listen carefully, Michael, because I'm only going to say this once more.
I am 72 years old, not 92. I am in perfect health according to Dr. Patterson, who's been my doctor for 20 years. I drive myself to the grocery store, to church, to my volunteer work at the library, and anywhere else I want to go. I balance my checkbook every month. I file my own taxes, and I make my own doctor's appointments. The words came out between little sobs of frustration that I've been holding in for months. The only thing that's changed is that my son has decided his mama is a burden instead of a blessing. That's when Lisa finally found her voice. And honey, she was mad. Michael, what is wrong with you? Can't you see what you're doing to her? Can't you see how you're making her feel? I'm just trying to help, Michael said weakly. No, you're not, David chimed in, surprising everyone. David was usually the peacekeeper, the one who tried to stay out of family conflicts. You think Mom needs help managing her money? She's the one who taught us all how to balance a checkbook. You think she can't make her own decisions? She's been making decisions for all of us our whole lives. You think she's too old to live alone? She's been living alone just fine since Daddy died, and that was 3 years ago. I felt such a surge of pride in my middle son that I thought my heart might burst. David had always been quiet, but when he spoke up, people listened. And you know what the really sad part is, David continued? She would have included you in everything if you'd just been kind to her. She would have asked for your advice if you'd offered it with love instead of judgment. She would have wanted you involved in her decisions if you'd approached her as a son instead of someone trying to take over her life. Michael was crying now, actual tears rolling down his cheeks, and I could see the little boy I'd raised peeking through the stubborn man he'd become. I'm sorry, Mom. I really am. I don't know when I started treating you like I was your child instead of your mother, I finished gently. He nodded, unable to speak. Michael, sweetheart, I know you love me. I know you worry about me. And honey, there's going to come a time when I do need more help. There's going to come a time when I can't live alone anymore, when I can't drive anymore, when I can't make my own decisions. I reached across the table and took his hand, the same hand I held when he took his first steps, the same hand I bandaged when he fell off his bicycle, the same hand I squeezed when he graduated from college.
But that time isn't now. And when it does come, I want to be part of the conversation about my future. I want to be treated like a person who has feelings and preferences and opinions, not like a problem that needs to be solved. I understand, he whispered. Do you, honey? Do you really? Because this isn't the first time we've had this conversation. I've tried to tell you gently that your help was feeling more like criticism. I've tried to hint that your suggestions were making me feel unwanted in my own home. But you kept pushing and pushing until I had to do something dramatic to get your attention. I squeezed his hand and smiled through my own tears. The house deed and the will changes, those are real, sweetheart. I meant every word, but they don't have to be permanent. Michael's head shot up, hope flickering in his eyes. If you can show me, really show me, that you respect me as your mother and not just as an obligation, we can talk about adjusting some of these decisions. The house is going to stay with Lisa because she's earned it, but there are other things we could discuss. How do I do that, Mom? How do I show you? Well, for starters, you could stop suggesting that I need to change my life to make you feel more comfortable. You could start asking me how I'm feeling instead of telling me how I should feel. You could remember that I'm still the same woman who raised you, just with a few more years and a lot more experience. I looked around the table at my family, my complicated, imperfect, loving family, and felt something I hadn't felt in months: peace. And Michael, the next time you bring a guest to my house, you introduce them to me as the woman who owns this house, not as the old lady who lives here. Jessica, who had been silent through most of this conversation, finally spoke up. "Mrs. Henderson, I owe you an apology. Michael told me some things about your situation that made me think, things that weren't true. I should have gotten to know you myself instead of listening to someone else's version of who you are. I studied this young woman who my son was dating, this girl who was young enough to be my granddaughter, and I saw something I hadn't noticed before. Sincerity. Thank you, Jessica. That takes courage to admit, and I respect that." I paused, choosing my words carefully. "You know, honey, if you're going to be part of Michael's life, you're going to be part of this family. And in this family, we believe in second chances." "I'd like that," she said quietly. "I'd like to get to know you better." "Well then, why don't you tell me about yourself? Not what Michael's told me, but what you want me to know." And so we spent the rest of that Thanksgiving dinner getting to know each other like civilized people. Jessica told me about her job as a teacher, about her love of gardening, about her own grandmother who'd passed away the year before. David talked about his plans for the house, about wanting to restore Harold's workshop in the garage, about maybe getting a dog to keep me company. David and Sarah shared their hopes for little Emma's future and how grateful they were for the college fund money. Even Michael started to relax as the evening went on, telling stories about his work and asking me about my volunteer activities at the library. By the time we got to dessert, my famous pecan pie, made from Harold's mama's recipe, the atmosphere in the room had completely changed. Instead of tension and anger, there was laughter. Instead of accusations and hurt feelings, there were apologies and promises to do better. But honey, the most important moment of the evening came when we were cleaning up the dishes. Michael was drying while I washed, just like when he was a little boy, and he said something that made me stop and really look at him. "Mom, I need to tell you something. I've been scared." "Scared of what, sweetheart?" "Scared of losing you. Scared that something would happen and I wouldn't be able to help. Scared that I'm not as good a son as Dad was a husband." I turned off the water and dried my hands on my apron, the same apron I'd worn for 20 years, the one with little strawberries on it that Harold had bought me for Mother's Day. "Michael, honey, your daddy wasn't perfect either. He made mistakes just like you're making mistakes. The difference was that when I told him something was hurting me, he listened. When I said I needed something from him, he found a way to give it to me. I want to listen, Mom. I really do. Then hear me when I tell you that trying to control my life isn't protecting me. It's hurting me. Hear me when I tell you that I need your support, not your supervision. Hear me when I tell you that I'm still your mama and I still have things to teach you about life and love and family." He nodded, and I could see that he was really hearing me for the first time in months. "And Michael, the next time you're scared about something, talk to me about it. Don't try to solve it without me. Don't make decisions about my life without including me in the conversation. We're family, and family works together." "Yes, ma'am." "Good. Now finish trying those dishes so we can have some more pie." As the evening wound down and everyone got ready to leave, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Hope that my family was going to be okay. Hope that the lessons learned around my dining room table that night were going to stick. Hope that the next time we all gathered, it would be as a family that respected and loved each other instead of one torn apart by misunderstandings and hurt feelings. Michael hugged me goodbye at the door, and it wasn't one of those quick, obligatory hugs either. It was a real hug, the kind that says, "I love you," and "I'm sorry," and "I'll do better," all at the same time. "Thank you, Mom," he whispered in my ear. "Thank you for not giving up on me." "Sweetheart, I will never give up on you, but I also won't let you give up on me." Jessica shook my hand politely and promised to call me the next week. Lisa kissed my cheek and told me she'd be over on Sunday to start looking at paint colors for the guest room she was planning to redo. David and Sarah loaded little Emma into her car seat and drove away with promises to bring her by more often. And then it was just me, alone in my house that was still my house, sitting in my chair that was still my chair, looking at my dining room table where my family had just learned one of the most important lessons they'd ever learn. Y'all, I couldn't stop laughing when I remembered their faces earlier that evening. You should have seen Michael when that deed came out of the envelope. You should have seen Jessica when she realized she was sitting in the middle of real family business. My voice was pure satisfaction, honey, because sometimes, just sometimes, standing up for yourself works out exactly the way it should. The house was quiet now, but it wasn't the lonely kind of quiet I'd been feeling for months. It was the peaceful kind of quiet that comes after a storm has passed and the air is clean and fresh again. It was the satisfied kind of quiet that comes when you've said everything you needed to say and people have actually listened. I sat there in my chair at the head of my dining room, looking at the place where Harold used to sit, and I felt him smiling down at me. Well, sweetheart, I think we raised them right after all. It just took a little longer for Michael to remember his raising. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 9 times, and I realized it had been almost 4 hours since Michael had told me to move from my chair. 4 hours that had changed everything about how my family saw me and how I saw myself.
I wasn't just Dorothy, the elderly mother who needed to be managed and controlled. I was Dorothy, the matriarch of this family, the woman who had earned her place at this table through 50 years of love and sacrifice and wisdom. I was Dorothy, who still had plenty of fight left in her and plenty of love to give, as long as that love was returned with respect. As I turned off the lights and headed upstairs to bed, I smiled thinking about all the stories I'd have to tell at the senior center on Monday, about how sometimes the best way to teach your children respect is to show them what happens when they don't give it, about how standing up for yourself doesn't mean you love your family any less, about how family dinners can change everything if you're brave enough to speak your truth. But mostly, I smiled thinking about next Thanksgiving, when we'd all gather around this same table again. Only this time, everyone would remember exactly where they belonged, and no one would ever question who belonged at the head of this table ever again. Sweet dreams, y'all, and remember, don't ever let anyone make you feel small in your own home, no matter how much you love them. Sometimes the people who love us most need the strongest reminders about how to treat us right. But honey, that wasn't the end of my story. Oh no, sweetie, because 3 weeks later, something happened that proved to me that sometimes lessons need to be reinforced before they really stick. I was sitting in my living room on a Tuesday afternoon working on a crossword puzzle and listening to my stories on the television when I heard a car pull into my driveway. Through the window, I could see Michael's silver BMW, and my heart did a little skip. He'd been so much better since Thanksgiving, calling me twice a week and asking about my day instead of giving me advice I didn't ask for. But when he knocked on my door, I could tell something was different. His shoulders were tense, and he had that look in his eyes that I recognized from when he was a teenager trying to talk his way out of trouble. "Hi, Mom," he said, giving me a quick kiss on the cheek. "Can we talk?" "Of course, sweetheart. Come on in. Would you like some coffee?" "No, thanks. Mom, I need to ask you about something, and I hope you'll hear me out before you get upset." Y'all, my mama radar started pinging like crazy. When your child starts a conversation that way, you know they're about to say something you don't want to hear. "What is it, Michael?" He sat down on the couch across from me, the same couch where I read him bedtime stories when he was little, and took a deep breath. "Jessica and I have been talking about getting married." I felt my face light up with genuine happiness. Despite everything that had happened at Thanksgiving, I'd grown to like Jessica quite a bit over the past few weeks. She called me just like she'd promised, and we'd had some lovely conversations about gardening and her students. "Oh, Michael, that's wonderful news. I'm so happy for you both. She's a lovely girl." "Thanks, Mom. That means a lot. But, well, there's something else."
And there it was, the other shoe I'd been waiting to drop. We've been looking at houses, and we found this beautiful place in Brentwood. It's perfect for starting a family. Great schools, nice neighborhood. The only problem is, I knew exactly where this conversation was heading. The only problem is, we need a bigger down payment than we have saved up. I sat back in my chair, not the dining room chair, mind you, but my comfortable reading chair where I'd spent countless hours over the years and studied my son's face. And you're wondering if I might help you with that down payment? Well, yes, I know that Thanksgiving was difficult, and I know I haven't been the best son lately, but Mom, this is about my future, our future. Jessica and I want to start a family, and this house would be perfect. The silence stretched between us like taffy, and I could see Michael getting more and more nervous as I didn't immediately respond. How much are you thinking, sweetheart? $50,000. Honey, I almost choked on my own spit. $50,000? That was more money than Harold and I had paid for our first house, and Michael was asking it like he was asking to borrow the car keys. That's a lot of money, Michael. I know it is, but Mom, you have the money from Grandma Ruth's estate, and I know you want to see me settled and happy. This would really help us get started in life. I looked at my son, this man I'd raised from a baby, this person I'd loved unconditionally for 38 years, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Disappointment. Not because he needed help, not because he was asking for money, but because 3 weeks after promising to treat me with respect, 3 weeks after learning that his behavior had consequences, he was sitting in my living room acting like nothing had changed. Michael, let me ask you something. Have you and Jessica talked about a budget for this house? Have you looked at what you can afford on your combined salaries? Well, yes, but this house is really special, Mom. It's exactly what we've been dreaming of. I see. And what happens if I say no? The question caught him off guard, and I could see him scrambling for an answer. I guess we'd have to keep looking. Maybe find something smaller, not as nice. Something you can actually afford, you mean? Mom, why are you being difficult about this? I thought after Thanksgiving we were good. I thought you wanted to help your family. Y'all, I felt my blood pressure start to rise like mercury in a thermometer. Here we were again. Here was my son asking me for something and then getting upset when I didn't immediately hand it to him. Here was my son treating me like a bank instead of like his mother. Michael, I want you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to say, because I have a feeling we're about to have another one of those conversations that changes everything. I stood up and walked to the window. The same window where I'd watched him play in the backyard as a child, where I'd waited for him to come home from dates as a teenager, where I'd cried when he moved out for college. 3 weeks ago, you sat at my dining room table and promised me that you would treat me with respect. You promised me that you would remember that I'm your mother, not your problem to solve. You promised me that you would include me in conversations about my life instead of making decisions for me. I turned back to face him, and I could see that he was starting to understand where this was going. But here you are 3 weeks later asking me for $50,000 without once asking me how I feel about giving you that much money, without asking me what my plans are for Grandma Ruth's inheritance, without considering that maybe, just maybe, I might have other ideas about how to use that money. Mom, I didn't mean... No, Michael, let me finish. You came into my house today and told me about your dreams, your plans, your perfect house. You told me what you need from me to make your life work the way you want it to. But not once, not one single time did you ask me what I want. My voice was getting stronger, and I could feel that familiar fire building in my chest, the same fire that helped me stand up to him at Thanksgiving. Not once did you ask me if I had plans for that money. Not once did you ask me if $50,000 is an amount I'm comfortable giving away. Not once did you ask me how I feel about my son coming to me for money 3 weeks after I had to completely rearrange my estate to get his attention.
Michael was staring at me with his mouth slightly open, like he was seeing me for the first time. And Michael, honey,
What bothers me most of all is that you started this conversation by saying you hoped I wouldn't get upset. Like my feelings about being asked for $50,000 are some kind of inconvenience you have to manage. I sat back down in my chair, but I didn't relax. I sat like a woman who had something important to say and was going to make sure it got said. So let me tell you what I want, sweetheart. I want a son who calls me and asks how my day was before he tells me about his problems. I want a son who remembers that I might have opinions about how my own money gets spent. I want a son who understands that asking for $50,000 is a big deal, not something you just throw into conversation like you're asking me to pass the salt. The tears were starting to build behind my eyes again, but this time they were tears of frustration and sadness, not anger. I want a son who remembers that 3 weeks ago, I had to give away my house and change my will to get him to treat me like a human being instead of like an ATM machine. Mom, that's not fair. I don't think of you as an ATM machine. Don't you? Because from where I'm sitting, it sure seems like the only time you come to visit me lately is when you need something. First, it was suggesting I sell my house. Then it was telling me I needed help managing my life. Now it's asking for $50,000? When was the last time you came over here just because you wanted to spend time with your mother? The question hung in the air between us, and I could see Michael trying to remember. The fact that he had to think about it told me everything I needed to know. I do want to spend time with you, Mom. Then why don't you? Why is it that the only conversations we have are about what I should do differently or what you need from me? I leaned forward in my chair, looking directly into his eyes, the same eyes that used to look up at me with such love and trust when he was small. Michael, I love you. I will always love you. And if you were in real trouble, if you were sick or unemployed or facing some kind of emergency, I would give you every penny I have without hesitation. I know that, Mom. But wanting a fancier house than you can afford is not an emergency. Wanting to live in Brentwood instead of somewhere more affordable is not a crisis. And asking your 72-year-old mother to fund your lifestyle choices is not fair. I could see him starting to get defensive, that stubborn look that meant he was about to argue with me, but I held up my hand. Before you say anything, let me ask you this. What have you and Jessica done to save for this down payment yourselves? How much have you cut back on your spending? How many sacrifices have you made to reach this goal? The silence told me everything I needed to know. Because, sweetie, your daddy and I saved for 3 years to buy this house. 3 years of eating peanut butter sandwiches for lunch and making our own coffee instead of buying it. 3 years of shopping at thrift stores and driving old cars and saying no to vacations. We earned our house, Michael. We didn't ask our parents to buy it for us. Times are different now, Mom. Houses cost more. Everything costs more. You're absolutely right, honey. Everything does cost more, which is exactly why you need to be more careful about what you can afford, not less careful. I stood up again and walked to the mantelpiece, where pictures of my family smiled down at me from different stages of their lives. Michael at his high school graduation, Michael at his college graduation, Michael at his first job, all the moments I've been proud of him, all the times he'd worked hard and earned something for himself. Michael, I love you. I will always love you. And if you were in real trouble, if you were sick or unemployed or facing some kind of emergency, I would give you every penny I have without hesitation. I know that, Mom.
But wanting a fancier house than you can afford is not an emergency. Wanting to live in Brentwood instead of somewhere more affordable is not a crisis. And asking your 72-year-old mother to fund your lifestyle choices is not fair. I could see him starting to get defensive, that stubborn look that meant he was about to argue with me, but I held up my hand. Before you say anything, let me ask you this. What have you and Jessica done to save for this down payment yourselves? How much have you cut back on your spending? How many sacrifices have you made to reach this goal? The silence told me everything I needed to know. Because, sweetie, your daddy and I saved for 3 years to buy this house. 3 years of eating peanut butter sandwiches for lunch and making our own coffee instead of buying it. 3 years of shopping at thrift stores and driving old cars and saying no to vacations. We earned our house, Michael. We didn't ask our parents to buy it for us. Times are different now, Mom. Houses cost more. Everything costs more. You're absolutely right, honey. Everything does cost more, which is exactly why you need to be more careful about what you can afford, not less careful. I stood up again and walked to the mantelpiece where pictures of my family smiled down at me from different stages of their lives. Michael at his high school graduation, Michael at his college graduation, Michael at his first job. All the moments I've been proud of him, all the times he'd worked hard and earned something for himself. Michael, I want you to be happy. I want you and Jessica to have a beautiful life together. But I also want you to have a life that you've built with your own hard work and your own sacrifices. I want you to have the satisfaction of knowing that you earned what you have. So you're saying no? I'm saying that I need you to think about what you're asking me. Really think about it. You're asking me to give you more money than most people make in a year so that you can live in a house that's nicer than you can afford. You're asking me to fund your dreams while I'm still trying to figure out what my own future looks like. I turned back to face him, and I could see that he was finally starting to understand. And Michael, most importantly, you're asking me to do this 3 weeks after I had to completely upend my estate planning to remind you that I'm not just here to make your life easier. The room went quiet except for the ticking of that old grandfather clock and the sound of cars passing by on the street outside. Normal sounds of normal life, while inside my living room, my son was learning another lesson about respect and responsibility. What if we paid you back? He said finally. With what money, sweetheart? If you can't save $50,000 for a down payment, how are you going to save $50,000 to pay me back, plus your mortgage, plus all the expenses that come with a baby? We'll figure it out. That's not a plan, Michael. That's hope. And hope doesn't pay back $50,000. I walked back to my chair and sat down, feeling every one of my 72 years in my bones. Let me tell you what I'm willing to do. I'm willing to help you and Jessica in ways that actually help. I'm willing to give you $5,000 for your wedding because that's an appropriate gift from a mother to her son. I'm willing to babysit my future grandchildren for free so you can save on childcare costs. I'm willing to teach Jessica how to coupon and budget the way I taught you kids. But I'm not willing to enable you to live beyond your means. I'm not willing to teach you that the solution to wanting something you can't afford is to ask mama to pay for it. And I'm absolutely not willing to go backwards in our relationship after we've worked so hard to fix it. Michael was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him processing what I said. This was the moment of truth, honey. This was when I'd find out if the lesson from Thanksgiving had really stuck,
or if he was just going to keep making the same mistakes over and over. "I'm disappointed, Mom," he said finally. "I know you are, sweetie, and I'm sorry about that, but sometimes being a good parent means disappointing your children when they ask for things that aren't good for them." "How is helping us buy a house not good for us?" "Because you're not asking me to help you buy a house. You're asking me to buy you a house. There's a big difference." I leaned forward again, reaching for his hand the way I had at Thanksgiving. "Michael, I want you to have everything you want in life, but I want you to earn it. I want you to feel proud of what you accomplished. I want you to be able to look at your house and your life."
We had it easier? Michael, we didn't have parents who could afford to give us $50,000 for a house. We didn't have the luxury of asking for help when things got tight. We had each other and our determination and the belief that if we worked hard enough, we could build a good life. I didn't mean, no. I think you meant exactly what you said. I think you've convinced yourself that your generation has it harder than any generation before, so that means you deserve help that previous generations didn't get. I think you've decided that working and saving and sacrificing is something other people should do, not you. The words were coming out faster now. 47 years of watching my children grow up and hoping they'd learn the values Harold and I tried to teach them. Michael, do you know what your daddy's first job paid? $67 a week. Do you know what our rent was on our first apartment? $40 a month. And there were weeks when we had to choose between paying rent and buying groceries. Mom, do you know how old your daddy was when he died? 68 years old. He worked himself to death, making sure you kids had everything you needed, and he never, not once, complained about how hard it was or suggested that someone else should pay our way. I was crying now, but they weren't sad tears. They were angry tears, frustrated tears, the kind of tears that come when someone you love doesn't understand how much other people have sacrificed for them. And now you're sitting in the house that he worked himself to death to pay for, asking me to give you $50,000 so you don't have to work as hard as he did. You're asking me to hand you the kind of money that he never saw in his entire life, and you're telling me that I had it easier than you do. Michael was crying too now, and I could see that he was finally understanding what I was trying to tell him. I'm sorry, Mom. I didn't think. That's right, sweetie. You didn't think. You didn't think about what it cost your daddy and me to build this life. You didn't think about the fact that the money you're asking for represents years of sacrifice from people who loved you. You didn't think about anything except what you want and how you want me to give it to you. I wiped my eyes with my handkerchief, the same handkerchief Harold had given me on our first anniversary, and looked at my son, really looked at him. Michael, I love you more than life itself. But I will not dishonor your daddy's memory by making his son's life easier than his was. I will not teach you that money is something that just appears when you want it, instead of something you earn through hard work and sacrifice. What do you want me to do, Mom? I want you to go home and sit down with Jessica and figure out what kind of house you can actually afford with your own money. I want you to make a budget and stick to it. I want you to save money every month like grown-ups do. I want you to earn your house the same way your daddy and I earned ours. I stood up and walked to the door, indicating that this conversation was over. And Michael, I want you to come back and see me next week, not because you need something, but because you miss your mama and want to spend time with her. He stood up slowly, looking like a little boy who'd just been told he couldn't have a cookie before dinner. I do miss you, Mom. Then show me, sweetheart.
Show me by treating our relationship like it matters more than my bank account." After he left, I sat back down in my chair and thought about what had just happened. 3 weeks. 3 weeks was all it had taken for my son to forget the lesson he'd learned at Thanksgiving. 3 weeks for him to go back to treating me like a resource instead of like his mother. But honey, this time I wasn't as upset as I had been before. This time I knew exactly who I was and exactly what I was worth. This time I knew that standing up for myself wasn't mean or selfish or ungrateful. This time I knew that teaching my son about respect and responsibility was the most loving thing I could do. The phone rang about an hour later, and it was Lisa. "Mom, Michael called me. He's upset about your conversation." "I'm sure he is, sweetheart. He said you refused to help him buy a house." "That's not exactly what happened, but I can see how he might tell it that way." "Mom, what really happened?" So I told Lisa the whole story, from Michael's request for $50,000 to his comment about Harold and me having it easier. I told her about my decision to offer $5,000 for the wedding instead, and about my suggestion that he and Jessica learn to live within their means. "Good for you, Mom," Lisa said when I was finished. "Someone needs to tell my brother that the bank of Mama is closed." "I just want him to learn, sweetheart. I want him to understand that the best things in life are the ones you work for." "He will, Mom. It might take him a while, but he'll figure it out. And Mom, I'm proud of you for standing your ground." "Thank you, honey. That means more to me than you know." 2 days later, Jessica called me. Not Michael, Jessica. "Mrs. Henderson, I hope it's okay that I'm calling you directly." "Of course, dear. What's on your mind?" "I wanted to apologize for Michael asking you for money without talking to me about it first. I had no idea he was planning to do that." "I see." "Mrs. Henderson, I grew up in a family where you worked for what you got. My parents would have been ashamed if I had asked someone else to pay my way, even family. I want you to know that I don't expect you to fund our life." "Jessica, that means a lot to me, more than you know." "I also wanted to tell you that we found a different house. It's smaller and not as fancy, but it's something we can afford on our own. And Mrs. Henderson, it feels good to know that it'll really be ours." Y'all, I started crying right there on the phone, happy tears this time, because I could hear in Jessica's voice that she understood what I was trying to teach Michael. "I'm so proud of you, sweetheart, both of you." "Thank you. And Mrs. Henderson, I hope you'll still give me those couponing lessons you mentioned. I have a feeling I'm going to need them." "I would love that, dear. Why don't you come over this weekend and we'll go through the grocery circulars together?" "That sounds perfect." After I hung up the phone, I sat back down in my chair and smiled. Maybe Michael hadn't learned his lesson yet, but Jessica had, and maybe, just maybe, she'd be able to help him understand what I'd been trying to tell him. The next Sunday, Jessica came over with a notebook and a determined expression. We spent 3 hours going through coupons and store sales and learning how to meal plan on a budget. She asked me about my grandmother's tricks for stretching $1 and Harold's methods for saving money on car repairs. "Mrs. Henderson, can I ask you something personal?" "Of course, dear. Do you think Michael will ever understand why you said no to helping us with the house?" I thought about that question for a long moment, looking out the window at the garden Harold and I had planted together, thinking about all the lessons I tried to teach my children over the years.
I think Michael is going to have to learn the same lesson his daddy learned, sweetheart, that the things you work hardest for are the things you appreciate most, that being handed everything you want doesn't make you happy. Earning it does. How long did it take his daddy to learn that lesson? I smiled, remembering the young man Harold had been when we first got married, so eager to have everything right away, so impatient with the slow process of building a life. "About 10 years, honey. About 10 years. "Do you think Michael has 10 years to figure it out?" "I think Michael has as long as it takes. And Jessica, I think he's lucky to have you to help him learn." That evening, as I was getting ready for bed, I thought about the conversation with Jessica and how different it had been from the conversation with Michael. One person saw asking for money as embarrassing and wrong. The other saw it as his right. One person wanted to earn what they had. The other wanted it handed to them. But honey, what gave me the most hope was that Michael had chosen to be with Jessica. Deep down, maybe he was still the boy I'd raised, the one who understood right from wrong. Maybe he just needed time to remember his values. 3 months later, Michael and Jessica sent me an invitation to a housewarming party. They'd bought a little ranch house in a modest neighborhood, something they could afford on their own. The invitation had a handwritten note from Michael. "Mom, thank you for teaching me that the best things in life are worth working for. Love, your son." Y'all, I cried reading that note. Happy tears, proud tears, grateful tears, because finally, my son had learned the lesson I'd been trying to teach him his whole life. At the housewarming party, I sat in their little living room surrounded by mismatched furniture and homemade decorations, and I felt prouder than I'd ever felt at any fancy gathering. This was what success looked like. Not the biggest house or the most expensive furniture, but the satisfaction of knowing you'd earned what you had. "Mom," Michael said, sitting down next to me on their secondhand couch, "I owe you an apology." "What for, sweetheart?" "For forgetting who raised me, for forgetting the values you and Dad taught me, for thinking I deserved to have everything handed to me instead of working for it." I took his hand, the same hand I'd held through scraped knees and bad dreams and graduation ceremonies. "Michael, you don't owe me an apology for being human. You owe me the promise that you'll remember this feeling, the feeling of being proud of what you've accomplished on your own." "I will, Mom. I promise." "Good. Because, sweetheart, this is just the beginning. This little house, this life you're building with Jessica, this is the foundation for everything that comes after. And honey, foundations built on hard work and sacrifice last a lot longer than foundations built on handouts." As I drove home that night, I thought about the journey my family had taken over the past 6 months, from that disastrous Thanksgiving dinner to this beautiful housewarming party. From my son treating me like an inconvenience to him remembering that I was his mother. From asking me to fund his dreams to building his dreams with his own hands. It had been a long road, full of hard conversations and hurt feelings and stubborn pride. But honey, we'd made it through. My family was stronger now, built on mutual respect instead of assumptions and entitlement. And me? Well, I was still sitting at the head of my table, still living in my own house, still making my own decisions. But more than that, I was still teaching my children about life and love and the importance of earning what you want. Some lessons take longer to learn than others, y'all. But the important ones, the ones about respect and hard work and appreciating what you have, those lessons are worth waiting for. Those lessons are worth fighting for. And sometimes the best gift you can give your children is refusing to give them everything they want so they can discover the joy of earning it themselves. Sweet dreams, y'all. And remember, the most valuable things in life aren't the ones that come easy. They're the ones that make you proud of who you become while you're earning them.